Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I don't yet have a title for this story, you'll just have to bear with me. I grew up in upstate New York, in Schuylerville, New York, outside of Saratoga Springs, where my father was a teacher at Skidmore College. And I began thinking very early in my life about the nature of time. It's a thing that shows up over and over again in my stories. I write in nested flashbacks because I do not believe that life is a linear experience. I think the present is a meaningless jumble of disjointed events that is only given shape by our memories. I started to figure this out when I was very young. I would walk to and from school a quarter mile, a half a mile from my house along the sidewalk, and sometimes I would just stop on the way home and sit on a curb at a crosswalk. I remember the feel of the rough pavement under my fingertips as my mind wandered. And I would try to create a bridge to the future. I would try to imagine the following day. I would create the moment the next day when I would be at lunch, sitting in the hard plastic chairs, staring out the window. I would try to imagine what kind of sandwich I would have. And I would imagine that by remembering this moment when that happened, I would create a bridge across time, connected by thought. And sometimes I would be particularly happy with my sandwich. I would entirely forget to think about the bridge I had started, and I wouldn't remember it until I was on my way home. And then I would decide that it was okay. I could just build an extension back to lunch, and that would connect back to the previous day. These are philosophical thoughts for a third grader.
Yeah.
I remember trying to imagine what my future would be like when I was an old man of 40 or 45. My father would drive me to guitar lessons and piano lessons and swimming lessons in Saratoga Springs. Sometimes I was in plays at Skidmore College with the college students, and he would drive me to rehearsals. So there was a lot of driving from Saratoga to Schuylerville in the car with my dad. I remember there were these weird joke structures that he would do. I had no idea what they meant. If anytime anyone mentioned a city or I mentioned a state that I was learning about in geography, he would say, I used to work in that town. I never knew why he said that. He clearly thought it was funny, but there was no real joke there. And there was a joke structure he would do with me as we were driving where I would say, I want to learn to play the cornet, and he would say, isn't that the seabird that dives? And I would say, no, that's a cormorant. And he would say, no, aren't those the planes they flew in World War II? And I would say, no, those are Corsairs. And he would say, and it would go on until I ran out of things to suggest or didn't know what he was referring to, or he ran out of a new idea. And then he would always end it by saying, and that brings us to Lulu McConnell. And I had no idea what that meant, but that was how that joke structure ended. And I remember one day on the drive, I started talking to him about these thoughts about the nature of time and the nature of memory, and he had been reading Proust, so he was highly absorbed in the ideas of memory and time, and he started to reminisce about his childhood when they didn't have television, they had radio. And some radio show that he loved to listen to that was a comedy that he listened to every week. He couldn't wait to get home to kneel by the fabric-covered speaker of the old Gothic arch radio that they had in their living room and listen to this show called It Pays to Be Ignorant. It was some kind of a comedy game show that he just thought was the funniest thing, and he couldn't really remember much about it, but he knew he loved it, and he talked about it for a good 10, 15 minutes, way longer than I was interested. That tends to be the way it goes with my parents. Things go on way longer than I'm interested in. For years, I thought of them as living through my accomplishments. Now I think of them as living through my inheritance. And all of this has been in my head for about a year now, I guess. About 3 months ago, I had a gig. I'm putting together a new solo show, and I took it to Saratoga Springs to perform at Cafe Lena. Cafe Lena has been around since I was a child. It's a folk singer's haven. It is a coffee house and performance space off the Skidmore College campus where I heard Arlo Guthrie perform until 2 in the morning after hearing him at the Saratoga Performing Arts Center, and where I heard any number of people perform in my childhood. I heard the Star Spangled Washboard Band perform there, and I thought they were hilarious and funny. And so I was booked to be back in Saratoga Springs, right near Schuylerville where I grew up, to do my solo show. And I took a day to drive from Saratoga back into Schuylerville like my father used to drive me, only now I was in a rental car that didn't smell of children and gassy dogs. And I parked in front of the house I grew up in, and I walked the quarter mile, half mile to school and back just to see what that place felt like. And I remembered as a child what it felt like to build little time bridges and to think about what it would be like when I was 40 or 45. Here I was, walking it again at 51. And I stopped for a second at a crosswalk and sat on the curb, put a hand on the imagined shoulder of my childhood self, and leaned forward to whisper into his little boy ear, "I remember you." I know he didn't hear me because I was there. My voice did not carry down the long corridors of time, but I said, "Thank you. You created me." I got back to my car and I drove back up to Skidmore, the campus I used to walk as a child, and then to Cafe Lena to perform in the evening. And I was brilliant. And then I went to my hotel. And I pulled out my computer to do work and email and see if there were messages from my wife. And the day was running through my head, and it was carrying with it a lifetime of memories. And I looked up Star Spangled Washboard Band to see if they still existed, and I found out that they do not. But I could find one song of theirs as an MP3 echoing down the corridors of time from my childhood to my hotel room. And then I gasped and I thought, oh, you can find anything on the internet. And I looked up It Pays to Be Ignorant. And I found an entire page of MP3s of my father's childhood favorite show. Now it turns out that It Pays to Be Ignorant was a fake scripted comedy game show that sold war bonds. And there was a celebrity panel of 3 performers and a professor who ran the show, and he would ask questions and they would spend the next 7 or 10 minutes misunderstanding the question and talking over one another and insulting one another, and he would insult them all for being stupid, and then they would have to go to a break. And they would bring in someone from the armed services who was in the audience, and they would pull a question out of a dunce cap, and they would read the question, and they would interview this armed services person, and they would all do scripted jokes in response. And it was all insult comedy, not my kind of thing, and very hokey, corny 1940s kind of jokes. But there was a running gag because one of the cast members was a woman who we were constantly told was obese. And her name was Lulu McConnell. And they had this gag they would do where the host would say, what is the sound made by the average crow? And one of them would say, that would be you're thinking of a cough. And someone would say, no, they don't make a cough. That's not right. They make a craw. And someone else would say, no, that's the part of their throat where they get things caught. And the other one would say, no, you're thinking of the cow. And the other one would say, no, that's the low-slung animal with the long udders and the twitchy ears. And they would say, and that brings us back to Miss Lulu McConnell. And I gasped, because I had forgotten about this joke he used to do that I didn't understand. And every episode there was one of these, would you like to hear me play on the bugle? The bugle, isn't that one of those Jewish boiled donut things? No, that's a bagel. No. You're thinking of the dogs with the long stomach and the ears that drag on the ground. And that brings us back to Lulu McConnell. Every episode, one of these jokes. And every episode, they would bring up someone from the armed services to pull a name out of the dunce cap. And they would ask the name of the person, and they would ask whether or not he or she was married, and they would ask where he or she was from. And one of the guys on the panel would say, I used to work in that town. And then the host would say, you used to work in Platte, Louisiana? And he would say, yes, I ran the lingerie department at Woolworths. You ran the lingerie department at Woolworths? Yes, I was the king of the undie-oiled. And then the show would go on. And I sat in a hotel room in the city next to the town where I grew up for 5 hours, listening to half-hour episodes of corny jokes from before I was born. And I imagined, with my headphones on and my ultra-modern, high-speed internet computer, playing the crackly, warped, dropout-filled radio plays, that I was kneeling next to a canvas-covered speaker. I imagined that I was 5 or 9 or 11. I imagined that I was my father. And for 4 hours, alone in a town where I left many memories, I listened to my father's childhood whisper down the corridors of time, and I laughed. Thank you.